Hello and welcome to another edition of SpraynPray1000's Verdict. I am SpraynPray1000 and today we are going to talk about Tom Clancy's The Division, a new IP from Ubisoft, a co-op team-based shooter set in a apocalyptic version of Manhattan where a virus has decimated the island in the city of New York, and it is up to you to figure out the origins of the virus, try to reestablish order, and also team up with other people to do various missions to stabilize the region. So, Tom Clancy's The Division basically is a third-person shooter with RPG elements and various different things that you can use to customize and outfit your character with a variety of abilities and weapons. And from the surface, it's very similar to games like Destiny, like Borderlands, team-based co-op shooters where you and friends take on waves of enemies as you push through a mission, ultimately culminating in a boss fight with an enemy that has a lot of health. And if you're expecting me to say something different about this game, I mean, the most I can say is that I feel that this game does it the best, but it still tends to do that. And unfortunately, that's good in some aspects, but that's also bad in a lot in terms of gameplay diversity and whatnot. While I will say this, The Division has a lot more diversity than you would expect from a game like Destiny. It does kind of fall into the same trappings. So I guess I'll start with the negatives first here. Mainly bullet sponge enemies. And I think that this is one of the worst parts about just about any game that does this, is that you have enemies that quite literally just take shit tons of damage. They don't die, they don't get staggered, and eventually after a minute or so of shooting them, they will concede defeat, die, and drop loot. And while I understand that this is a staple of games like The Division, it nonetheless is a very annoying tendency that these games tend to rely on for difficulty, for extending time, etc., etc. And unfortunately, I really wish at some point that The Division did not fall into this pattern as heavily as it does, because it just kind of leads to boring, typical gameplay where you're sitting there shooting at stuff. So, regretfully, that is in this game. But what I will say about this game is that enemies do die pretty quickly. If you and your team fire an enemy, or even if you're just playing by yourself, if you focus fire an enemy, they can't regain their armor. They essentially will die very quickly once their armor is gone, which is something that these other games could take a lot of notes from. Just because something has a lot of health and, is a big bullet sponge is not a good thing, and I like that The Division essentially lets you murder people once their armor is gone. So that is at least in a good part. So each agent in this game can outfit themselves in one of three different ways. You can outfit yourself and have abilities that are medical, you can have offensive type of abilities, and you can have defensive abilities that are more focused on survivability. And you can switch between them almost at any time, just out of combat, and the variety of them allows you to customize your play style in different ways. I think this game has too much of a reliance on heal, I feel, in order to actually do anything. I feel that heal, if they were going to make it essentially so mandatory no matter what mode you're playing with however many people, should have just been a neutral skill to begin with. And you could specialize to make it better or whatnot, because essentially what you end up doing is you more or less have to take it in order to tank your way through some of this stuff, unless you're really, really good and can survive on the scarce med kits alone. Otherwise, I think that the abilities in this game are really cool. There's a good variety of abilities that I've experimented with, both on and off the playthrough. Typically, I run more of a medical style, but while I was doing leveling and grinding out some missions, I decided to mess around and screw around with some of the various different abilities, and that's really, really fun to be able to place turrets and such. You can equip two abilities and then one signature skill, which is essentially like your ultimate. It's your most powerful ability, with essentially, as they say, is to turn the tide of whatever you're fighting in. Otherwise, The Division is a open world free roam type of a game set in Manhattan. And one thing that I will say about this game is the presentation of this game graphically is probably so far my favorite one this year. It looks exactly like Manhattan. You are running through almost a very realistic copy of Manhattan, and that, as someone who lives in New York City, I can tell you is probably the closest we've gotten in a long time to a actual representation of Manhattan in a video game. It looks really lifelike. It looks really realistic. That's cool as hell. I really enjoy that thoroughly. Otherwise, what I will say is that Manhattan has a lot to explore. There's a large area of Manhattan that you're able to explore, and while at the start it kind of seemed like, oh, this isn't that big of an area, you have to remember that each street that you see on the map is defined. It's a place that you can go to. So essentially, the game allows you to go as far north as 59th Street and Central Park West, and as far down as 14th Street, and that's a good variety of stuff. I feel like that, and not only that, it's from both the west side to the east side. It is just a big square of Manhattan. That is really, really good and really, really cool that everything in that area is fully defined and fully outfitted. Is really awesome, and I think that that's really sick. I'm saying really a lot, but that is very, very cool that they have such a defined environment, and it is a pretty big overworld to try and traverse. It is not necessarily a super small, compact area, because each street is more or less to life size inside the game. So that's really good. There's a variety of locations. Unfortunately, again, there's a variety of enemies, but they more or less all play the same. You have your typical heavy enemies, your light enemies. Some enemies have purple bars and they're harder to kill. Some enemies have yellow and they're essentially mini bosses or bosses. There's named enemies that drop loot. Very similar to any other shooter looter. You collect loot by running around, picking it up. There's different colors of loot that specifies the rarity and the strength of it. And again, very typical stuff. You're generally trying to equip the best loot for your build that will give you the best stats. And like I said, there's white loot, there's green, there's blue, there's purple, and then there's yellow, and lastly now there's green, which is for gear sets. If you complete the set, you get the most amount of stuff. So again, it's very, very typical of how it does things. I will say this, I do like that you can have up to 4 people. Even the box art is deceptive on this. You can have up to 4 people in your squad at any given time, which is really cool. And the PvE aspect of this game, as I said, basically more or less is very similar to, say, Destiny. There's your typical missions that you can replay. Once you get to max level, you can replay them for better loot. You can replay them for currency called Phoenix credits. You can replay them for money and stuff like that. Additionally, there's also a area in the game called the Dark Zone, which is heavily PvP. While there are NPCs that you can kill, there are also a variety of enemies that are players that can attack you at any moment. And when they do, you have to be ready to defend yourself or risk losing loot, Dark Zone experience, which is separate from your normal level, and more. Now, you can't lose any loot that you own that's in your normal inventory, but any inventory or any item that you pick up in the Dark Zone has to be extracted by helicopter, or you can't use it. It's called contaminated, because it's infested with the virus and it needs to be cleaned before you can use it. So players in the Dark Zone will try to kill each other to take this rare loot because it's valuable. It means something. It has a very good usage, perhaps, and you never know if someone has something good or not until essentially you take it from them, you steal it. And that's kind of the risk reward of the Dark Zone. You kind of need a team of people you trust to work with you, so that way you all can get your loot and get out of there. It also helps that the various moves that you can do, whether it be rolling, healing, etc., so you can maximize your chances of surviving in PvP. Now, you can work together with people in the Dark Zone that are not in your group, but generally if you shoot at them or hit them with an ability, you enter a state called Rogue, where you have disavowed the division and you are essentially able to be hunted by other players for being rogue. Now, they can attack you for free, without going rogue, because you're already a rogue, and rogues can kill rogues. So it basically turns into a dog-eat-dog world out there. Alright, but we'll do this virus research. You want to try to probably stay away from that unless you're going heavily PvP.
I wonder what he did to this guy.
Like that. Anyone can get the first strike, and then they'll turn rogue. It's not the other way around.
Something.
So I did have fun running the Dark Zone. There's
just
a lot of cool stuff. Sometimes you win,
1911.
sometimes you lose, and I like that fun aspect
You didn't
of
even
it.
drop any clothing.
And I'll especially say this, at the
You know, I
end
kind of
game
want a
of this
204
game,
revolver.
trying to get loot from the
I don't
Dark
know why.
Zone is actually more efficient than doing some of the end-game raids and end-game
Oh yeah,
stuff,
don't get me wrong,
because
they're
all
absolutely
the enemies
trash,
in
but
the
it just
end-game
is
raids
so
are
cool.
essentially
Yeah, you just
bullet
want to be
sponges
Revolver
that
Ocelot,
don't always
don't
drop
you?
good loot and don't drop a lot of
Revolver
loot.
Sloth.
And that is the biggest
Wait, that's an
problem
enemy.
I feel with this game, is that the end game, while it is fun to reach such a high
Oh, yeah,
level
the
and is
pistol.
feasible, you know, it's a lot of just annoyances because the enemies just simply do not die and they deal a lot of damage. And again, bullet sponges are cool if used within reason, but otherwise
Dude, that
they're
glitch
just
where you don't
a
aim,
nuisance.
or
And this
your
game
third
does
person
fall
model
back
doesn't
on
look
it,
where it's shooting is
unfortunately.
great.
Not as heavily as I would say Borderlands.
We saw that guy, you did
or,
like the illest
Destiny,
lean to the
but
left.
This game does utilize that pretty poorly, I feel.
Oh,
And
wait,
it could be done
shit.
much better. So, unfortunately,
I forget that these
I'm
guys
kinda
aren't, like,
saddened by that
normal
choice,
people.
But nonetheless, the Division
See, this is the
at
problem.
least
When you
has
live
an
in New York City,
alternative
you
to
see
it, which is
people wearing
nice.
these
Most
kinds of
games don't
vests
have
all the
that, where you
time.
can just play the Dark Zone.
So
you
it's
can
like,
run
oh,
the
this
same
is normal.
typical
They're
chests,
friendly.
and you can do PvP if you want to get ahead, and that's really where the most
Don't worry,
fun
we'll
comes
definitely
from.
make sure to
And
have
the Dark Zone really
Mr. Searcher
kind of
2 here when
saves
we get
this
to the
game
Crooklyn
just by
DLC.
virtue of allowing you to do that. Now, that being
I don't
said,
think we're going into
the
Crooklyn.
crutch of this game,
Gotta go back.
relying on that, is still very, very annoying, and I'm going to take off points for that because that's really
Dude, Queens
just
is
not
gonna be
what I
great.
think
It's
that
just gonna
game
be
should strive
copy-paste.
to do. I think that game should strive.
I'm
to
sticking
be
with that. It's gonna be
different than
copy
that.
paste.
And while it is cool to have a game in that
No,
genre,
but judging on
probably
how
not the best
accurate
choice
these
to do
developers
that.
want to be,
alternately, I do like the variety
I'm
of
assuming
missions. I
it's-
do like the
that
story
they're-
of
well,
you
a
know
lot of
figuring
stuff
out
is
what's
actually
going
copy
on
and
with who
paste.
where.
How lazy.
And it ultimately paves the way for more, which I think
Oh, we
is
have to
what
go
I
out the
really
window, I
want
think.
to see. Is that I want to see more of the story continuing. I want to see more of what's going to happen.
Dang.
You know, maybe not necessarily a sequel,
What's
but with
going
DLC.
on?
I think
Wait,
that
what?
the characters in
Where?
this game really come across not only looking good graphically again, but looking
Okay, Busta
being
Rhymes.
interesting. In general, to not only work with, but to fight
The
against, and in
wind,
general
the-
to interact with. I think
Fucking
that
GTA.
the story aspect of this game is very strong. It's very,
Is
very
there any reason
positive,
for
and
all
it has
three
a
of us to
very
be
good
doing
presence.
this mission at once?
So, soundtrack-wise,
Other than just clipping off of each
gameplay-wise,
other?
or excuse me, soundtrack-wise, graphics-wise, and story-wise, this game
teamwork makes dream
is
work.
basically hitting the high marks in my opinion. It has a very good, well-defined
know where the hell
cutout
I
in all
am.
those different areas. But the problem is that the
Yeah,
gameplay
this is heavily
towards the
contaminated
end, and
shit.
especially in the post-game,
I'm coming.
has
You have to kill
become
people.
very, very tedious and
Alright, I
grindy
forgot,
outside
I forgot,
of the Dark
I forgot
Zone.
I'm not
Now,
level
this could
30.
change,
Go
and again,
help
this
him.
game's
I'll figure
meta
it
has
out. Go
changed
help him.
since it originally came out. Apparently, it changed for the worse a few patches ago.
Just dropped
I'm
a
lucky
med
to have
kit
not
for me.
played it then, because if I had reviewed it then, I would have really been upset. But the game itself has
I
changed
need some
drastically.
assistance. The grenades
So,
are getting closer.
what would I give the
fuck did
Division?
you get to? Oh, okay.
I'd say that despite its flaws, it's still a solid entry. It's
Out
still
the
something
window
fun.
with this
It's just that
one.
you need to know what you're getting into when you play this game. It could be something right up your alley. It could be
Thank
very,
you.
very annoying. And unfortunately, there's no way to really
about to
know
die.
that until you actually get down
Dude,
and
this-
playing it.
this
I feel that
MP7 I got
at the
is
very
great.
least, it's fun enough that I would say definitely give it a shot, give it a whirl.
Adam, this is like
And
Modern
if you
Warfare
have
3 all
friends
over
that can
again.
join you, that's even better because that basically lends itself to a lot of replayability, a lot of daily missions and whatnot, and definitely some fun in the Dark Zone. Whether you are the hunters or the hunted,
So how do we get
it is
down?
definitely some fun and definitely a very enjoyable
Fast travel.
experience. Now, I will say this: the variety
Okay,
of
well, when he
weapons
puts
is
it
good.
like that, how can I
The
possibly
variety of
refuse?
abilities is really good. You can outfit your character.
Yeah, well,
you
there's
can
side
customize both
missions
their
over here. Oh, look,
appearance
yeah, it
and
skips
their
from
gear
49th to
separately.
52nd,
So if you
you're
have a
right.
certain look, but you don't,
Yeah, so he
if
Armand
you have a
pointed
certain
out
look
that they skip
and you wanna
streets,
keep it,
like they
you are
skip
totally allowed to
48th
do
and
that
they
while
skip.
you change out gear, which I
Jesus,
think
like
is something that a
5
lot more games
streets.
need to do. Essentially, as is called in other
Ooh.
games, transmog and glamour and whatnot. I really want to see way more of that because
Skip
that
the
really
shit,
helps
no one will
out, I
miss.
feel, with the game. It helps out keeping things fresh. So what would I give the Division? I'll give the Division an 83 out of 100. Again, the shooter-looter aspect is fun, and it's done within reason. I just feel that it could be done even better. It could take it to a higher level. And while the Dark Zone does redeem a lot of it, the real meat of this game comes from the okay gameplay, the good story, the amazing graphical detail and graphics in general, and just the overall sense of enjoyment and fun that I get when playing and exploring and getting something new. Something that I did not get from Destiny. Destiny, I did not get something like that, and I would say that this game far outpaces Destiny by far, just by virtue of being less tedious and less annoying and actually giving you damn rewards for the amount of work you put in. So, unlike Destiny, this game I feel really at least rewards you appropriately for when you do stuff. Whereas Destiny, if you try to do stuff, it's meh. And Borderlands throws stuff at you, but I typically found that a lot of the stuff it throws at me isn't even that good anyway. So this game strikes a nice balance between the amount of loot and the quality of the loot. So, that's basically it for this edition of The Verdict. SpraynPray1000. I'll see you next time for more.